This is Mr. Mike Wells going to do a overview of his experience in deploying HITRUST at the Health Collaborative. Mr. Wells.
All right, thank you. As I was saying, that this is a rerun of a presentation I gave at CSO HIMSS late last summer. So fortunately, Fred's not on with us today because he's already seen it once. I'm going to abbreviate it because I'm not being paid by the hour. So generally, I went through HITRUST. I did it 2 years ago, and it turned out to be a whole lot more effort than I thought. And so I've been sharing my experience with people as it's becoming more and more a thought that people are trying to get into. Slides are reruns. Basically, HITRUST was created because there wasn't really a certifying organization for your HIPAA security stuff, and many bosses like mine were running around saying that they were HIPAA certified, and then people like me were cringing and saying, no, there's no such thing, don't say that. And HITRUST came along, and so now you can kind of use it as a valuable proxy for HIPAA certification. And it is, thanks to the demands of the payer system, becoming widely accepted as as an authority. They've created their control structure, which, interesting enough, is called CSF also, as all cybersecurity frameworks are. And it is it's mapped to all the other standard frameworks that we all use. And within this group, we tend to be very focused on that NIST 853, and they've got a really nice cross-reference in the back of their Bible that's got all the mapping from their controls to the controls in these different frameworks, which can be helpful if you've already got some sort of a document that describes how your controls map to the NIST 853. They can be very helpful in completing all your paperwork. So getting into the process, there are really two different CSF assessment types, self-assessments and then validated and then certified. So on the validated and certified side, that's where you actually pay an assessor to come and review all your work. And then they've been highly trained and screened by the HITRUST group or organization, and that's where all the trust in the framework and in the accreditation actually exists. The self-assessment exists primarily so that you can do an internal assessment before you get into the paid side. On the validated side, there has been, and one of the struggles that HITRUST has had with creating adoption for this being a widely trusted assessment and security framework, were claims that there were certain assessors out there that would, for the fee, guarantee you a passing grade. And to address that, the HITRUST group a year and a half ago put in a subcommittee of their organization that provides a lot of deep oversight of their assessors, and weeded out a bunch of those a year ago. And now all the assessment organizations go through not just regular training, but deep reviews of their reviews of people like me when we do our work. So they assess me, and then they turn in all that documentation, and HITRUST now spends weeks reviewing that submission as opposed to days. These are the 19 control families that your assessment covers. Within each one of these families, just like within the NIST framework, there's dozens of controls depending on the subject matter. As APS has pointed out, it's really not so much a risk-based framework, although they do have a section on risk management, but it does cover all the different controls that we are used to dealing with. I got into it because I'm a BA, a business associate for all of you, and receive data from all of you, and therefore all of you have the right and often ask me for some sort of assertion that I'm doing a good job in this area. And so in any given year, I might get 5, 6, 10 different large spreadsheets saying, please tell me all about everything you do. And my goal and hope is that this becomes a single solution that I can then point to that will make everybody feel comfortable, and I will do less of those individual spreadsheets. And so far it's worked pretty well. I've had a couple of payers who have not accepted it yet. The biggest one just was because they hadn't had time to actually cross-reference the HITRUST framework to the frameworks that they were already accepting as far as assessment documentation. So over another year or two, I think that it'll become more widely accepted. But it also really did give me an opportunity to dig deeper into my framework and my documentation. The biggest problem that I had as I got into the actual work was that my policies and procedures were not formalized sufficiently. And we were doing all the right work, but we just hadn't written down all the stuff that we do and created auditable processes where I could point to documentation and evidence that said, yes, I really have made sure that my antivirus signatures were always up to date. And I follow up on IPS alerts that come out and that kind of stuff. So it really did help me formalize and tighten down the cybersecurity practices that we had. So the process of getting into the HITRUST process, HITRUST, and obviously they need to make money, so they rent you a tool to do your assessments in called MyCSF, and they just released their new version, which is a little easier to use, and it's basically a version like RSAM, I'm guessing, that you can type all your stuff into and keep track of all your controls and what level of maturity you have achieved in those controls, and I'll show you how that looks in a few minutes.
Hey, Mike.
Yeah.
This is an interactive section. I looked at HITRUST pretty closely when I was at Omnicare, and just kind of felt like the cost, and they may charge you based on the size of your organization, but there were a couple of things. I felt like the cost of entry was too much, and that I didn't really see much even awareness outside of just kind of core healthcare. I guess I asked you to address those two things. The first
Sure.
one on cost is how did you sell it? Did they change their model any? And then have you felt like you've seen broader? And of course, your customers are presume are all healthcare, so that might not be as much of an issue of selling that internally.
And you're right, they do have cost. They have a tiering structure, so based on the size of your organization or the number of bodies that you need to have access to the CSF tool, it was a little pricey, but as I was mentioning, I was spending somewhere between a quarter and a third of my time filling out these spreadsheets. And so,
right.
I got an ROI there. It's not the same for you guys because you're probably not getting asked by people as often to fill out their spreadsheets because you're the top of the food chain. They have expanded the framework to cover other industries. PCI is also wrapped into it. I'll show you in a few minutes the external frameworks that you can attest to. So in addition to HIPAA, you can attest to FISMA and to GDPR and to PCI. There's probably like 15 or 20 different auxiliary certifications you can tag into it. Most of the assessors are also AICPA, so they can also do a SOC 2. So when you approach the assessor, you can pay 50 grand for your HITRUST assessment, and then 10 more grand, and you get a SOC 2 with it. And they'll just they'll write up both reports and base it off of the same content. And so I'm sure you could even go one step further and get your PCI cert, documentation accreditation, whatever the PCI one is, through the same activity.
And then does the My CSF create a usable output that you can share directly with your customers?
It produces a nice set of reports that kind of says, here are all the controls that I certified against and what my score was in each of those controls, as well as it's got the certification letter that says that you've met the requirements for the HITRUST certification, and it'll have all your control factors listed in there, as well as your scope, which is the next item here, and something that from the healthcare system you would definitely want to figure out what it is that you want to have HITRUST certified. You don't have to certify your entire organization. You could say, I am just going to do my ED platform, or you can do a piece of your organization that has particular exposure, perhaps.
But Mike, if memory serves, one of the big drivers for you from a business value standpoint was the fact that you had pressure from folks that you needed to do business with that were kind of point you in this direction. Is that right?
That is correct. Yeah. In addition to the ROI I get from not doing as many spreadsheets, United Healthcare and one of the two A's, Anthem or Aetna, I can't keep them straight, mandated that if we were going to be receiving their data, then I had to be HITRUST certified. And so they kind of forced my hand, but I was still able to establish an ROI on top of the requirement.
Thanks.
Yep, that get you there, Greg, too? Sort of?
Yes, thank you.
Mm-hmm. All right, yeah, so as I was saying, you want to pick your scope. It doesn't need to be the whole organization. You can, HITRUST things as you think that there is value in identifying or controlling that particular space. For you guys, and I'll get to this in another slide or two, there's some value in adopting or understanding the HITRUST environment, but more from managing your vendors. Let me speed through some of these other things. You definitely need to pick a certified assessor. They've got a bunch of them listed on their website. You do a full assessment every year, and then every other year, and then opposite years you do an interim, which is basically just they pick a random control out of each of the different families plus any gaps that were identified, and review those controls to make sure they're still in place. This screen is kind of small. When you start the process, and you can look at this, I sent the slides out, you can expand it. When you start the process, you kind of describe what kind of an organization you are and what kind of system you're assessing, and that will identify which of the controls in the control framework are applicable. There's like 500 or 600 controls in the current 9.2 version of the framework. 350 or something like that were applicable to my organization. And so this will help identify which of those controls are required. As I was mentioning, there are additional regulatory factors that can be in, and I know that's kind of faint because none of them highlight for me on my CSF UI, but that's what's at the bottom of this screen is all the different other things like GDPR and Massachusetts something or other and PCI. So the controls, this is an example, or this is a page out of their book. All of us except for apps are allowed to download their book. And the book has, it's 1,000 pages. It's got all the controls listed out. And the top left there is the, a section of the table of contents. Then the bottom right there is the beginning of one of the control descriptions for user password management. And it gets somewhat descriptive. It tells you that you need to have password management that meets these different criteria. You'll see that level 1. The controls have up to 3 levels based on the kind of organization you are. So based on those control factors from the previous screen, you might be identified as a level 1, level 2, or level 3 organization, which means that you need to satisfy the control at the subsequently higher levels. based on the amount of data that I have. I ended up being, I was affected by all the level 3 controls. And so they just, they continue to add additional stuff, like the one on firewalls. I'm supposed to have redundant firewalls from different companies. I'm supposed to have like Cisco and Fortinet or something. Because how small I am, I'll admit that I failed that one, but those are the kinds of things that come into play when you get higher in the level group. So the scoring process. So this is the scoring rubric or the sheet, and so there are 5 maturity levels that you can accomplish. So that's down the left-hand side, your scoring system, which is your not compliant, somewhat compliant, partially compliant, mostly compliant, and fully compliant. And so you get a percentage of the score based on how compliant you are with the policy statements, procedure statements, implementation level, whether you're measuring your implementation and then managing your implementation. And then inside each one of these grids, you'll see how they describe how you achieve that particular level. And so that then leads into your scoring process. So the very top of this slide is the password management. And this is not my actual scores. I doctored this up for presentation purposes. But it would, it has the statement in there, and then for fully, for the first column there, where I'm fully compliant, that's, you have a policy. The second row or column is procedure. Third is implementation. Fourth is measured, and the fifth is managed. And you get percentage score of 100 as you add those up. And that example that I have there with the 3 greens and 2 yellows gets you an 81.25, which is a 4- in their Prisma scale. And then you'll see in the lower one, you've got the 19 control families, the number of controls that are applicable to me in this case, but to the assessment, and then your average score within that control family based on the average of all the scores for the control elements within that. And you need to have a 3+ Prisma score, which is a 79. You have to have that in order to pass that control family, and you have to pass every control family in order to get your assessment, your certification. And so if you have, I forget what they call it, but the light green, you can create remediation steps. And as long as the remediation steps have you properly remediating the control within an acceptable time frame, then you can get a certification off that. But if you have any reds, you have to fix those and then recertify, and you can't recertify for at least until 6 months have passed. So that leads back to, you probably want to do a self-assessment first in order to know that you can get there. Okay. This is kind of the meat and potatoes about the process. Any questions on that? So it's very objective. It's do you do this thing? The assessor's been trained in what somewhat compliant, mostly compliant, fully compliant really mean. And that's the only place where you have a little bit of flexibility is, how do you convince them that you really are fully compliant? We've talked about most of the driving factors. For sake of time, I'm just going to focus on the third one there, third-party risk assessment. So for your space, one of the benefits that is being driven in the market right now is you guys can all collaborate through a group like this and say, you know what, let's all go together and help a common vendor apply for and achieve high trust assessment, and then we can all accept their high trust as a third-party risk assessment, and we won't have to do third-party risk assessments on these common vendors. So if you got some high valued shared vendors, there might be some opportunity for you to also get some ROI within your third-party risk assessment organizations or teams. Make sense?
Yep.
And everybody says, so do you think you're more secure? And I think it really did benefit me. It really helped me exhibit to management the importance of some of the places where we were a little bit light, and get a little additional visibility and funding for some things that I wasn't doing, such as the STEAM and disaster recovery capabilities. And so both of those are being deployed as we speak. Questions?
Hey, Mike, this is Lisa. I joined really late and I'm in the car,
Lisa.
so I can't, hi, and I can't see your slides, and I'm sorry if you already answered this, but who did you use for your assessor?
I used Coalfire.
You did, okay. That was
Yep.
always top of mind for me, so
Yep.
did you find
And
them good to work with? Yeah.
Yeah, I had a lousy first experience with them, and with a lot of work, they recovered. And I'm going to use them for my full assessment this time around. And then depending on how that goes, I may continue that relationship, or I may choose an alternative.
Did you consider others when choosing Coalfire?
Yes, I reached out to 3 of the people that were on HITRUST lists, and talked deeply with one of the other ones. The third one didn't even call me back.
Funny.
And
okay. And in your less than stellar experience with Coalfire, could you share any sort of lessons learned with that?
Because I was being forced to get HITRUST certified by United, I decided not to do the self-assessment and just to jump straight into the validated assessment. And the assessor that I was working with from Coalfire had reviewed my policies and had spent almost 9 months working with me, saying, oh, you need a tweak here and a tweak there. And somebody then did some quality assurance review of his work and wondering why this assessment was taking this long, and discovered that he had completely ignored how immature my policies and procedures were. And so he is no longer with the company, and I got a phone call the next day saying, we are really sorry for this, but this was like the week before Christmas. Starting the first of the new year, you're going to be starting all over again with a new person.
Oh.
Yep.
Goodness,
and then if you want to
awful.
and then if you want to get into conspiracy theories, they then said, and for a small fee, we already have written policies that meet the HITRUST stuff that you can purchase from us and adopt within your organization.
Oh, bad taste in my mouth.
Yeah, it stung for a minute, but when I looked at them, it's like it would take me a long time to do the same thing. And it was nice because there were Word documents, and in the they had like track changes turned on, and in the margin they had all of the cross references of this sentence in this paragraph complies with this particular HITRUST control 01.d paragraph 2. So
Gotcha.
It was really easy to manage going forward as they because HITRUST is they want to live forever, so they're continuing to update their framework. And so I can continue to update these documents to continue to show compliance.
Wow, it's such a money-making scheme.
It is.
The HITRUST mafia.
Oh, indeed. But at the end of the day, Mike, it sounds like you got value out of going through the process, and you feel truly like it helped you improve.
I'll turn the question around. Does it make you guys feel more comfortable giving me all your data? And so far, everybody I've talked to has said yes.
Yes.
Yeah, I go to some of these group meetings, and I'll be sitting with like Nationwide of Columbus, and they said, "Oh yeah, that's right. You're one of the few third-party processors that we don't even worry about."
Nice.
Yeah.
Very nice. All right. Well, that's good to know. And especially, I know that it's painful because you were required to from United. And, I've been on the fence about requiring our third parties to become certified because it is an expensive process. the flip side to that coin is it did help you. So
it did help me. Yeah, and at my size, it really helped me also focus resources where they needed to be focused.
Yeah, and you were able to articulate to your the importance and value of some of the investments that you need to make.
Absolutely. We wouldn't consider not renewing at this point.
So guys, really quickly, this is Apps again. I don't want to interrupt the conversation, but just want everyone to know that Justin Stracani, I hope I'm pronouncing that right, from SecureLink is now on the call. And we can keep on chatting about this, but I just want everyone to know that that he is on the call. Hi, Justin, by the way.
Good morning. Hello.
And Lisa, great to have you on the call. Long time no talk.
I know it's been a crazy year, but I'm glad to be here, and I'm really hoping to make our next in-person meeting.
We're actually going to be doing it closer to Dayton for you Dayton.
Even better.
Yeah, to make it a little bit less of a haul for you. So, but anyways, sorry to interrupt, Mike. I just wanted everyone to know that Justin was on the call.
Yeah, nope. And as I was saying, Lisa, to the extent that you and your peers can get together and say, we're going to together work with these particular vendors that we all work with. So if you guys can accept the HITRUST instead of your current form,
make you guys your life a lot easier, right? So less questionnaires to fill out. Yep.
Exactly. Although your team's always very easy to work with, and I appreciate that, but there are others that are a little less accommodating.
Well, thank you. I will pass that along to my manager in that space. So I do have the desire to go to a more standard framework, and we've been talking about what that looks like. And of course, HITRUST is something that we would all, strongly consider, given we're in the healthcare space. Did you find, because one thing that you mentioned when I first joined was defining your scope. And that always concerns me from being on the other side where I'm the one evaluating the third party partner. Yep. And I've noticed that a lot of games can be played with scope. Can you comment on that in terms of the experience that you had?
That is the critical question. And the HITRUST assessment report, the validated report, clearly states the scope of it, which really is the applications within my system that were part of the assessment. I chose to do my entire organization because it's small enough that I could do it, and because everything that we do is applicable to our customer base. So yes, that would be the important question as you're looking at your vendors and saying, okay, this is the thing that we consume from you, and so this has to be clearly defined within your HITRUST assessment scope.
Exactly. And then how do you feel about sharing? Do you have any concerns about sharing the entire report as executive summary? That's the other thing that we've bumped up against. Well, we just want to give you the executive summary. Well, no, we'd really like to see the whole report to get a comfort level to understand it. And it's okay if there's areas you're working on, but it gives us a comfort level to know that the most important controls are in place, if that makes sense.
Yeah, so far what I've done is I give there's a section of the full report that kind of talks about the scope and that kind of stuff. And then I also have a spreadsheet, which is an excerpt that has all of the controls that I was subject to. My intent, and I just haven't had a chance to sit down and actually read the report in its entirety with a fine-tooth comb, because it's like 300 pages long. I wanted to look through it carefully and make sure that there were no comments by the assessor or anything like that that are weird. And after I do that, then I would be comfortable sharing the entire report unredacted to anybody who gives me their data.
Great. I feel like if people are willing to share the full report, that that's a big vote from me. Anyway.
Yeah, that is absolutely the intent, because I can't imagine you being comfortable with this report unless you can see my scores.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
Okay.
I can't expect you to accept it. Yeah.
Appreciate sharing this information. I'm looking forward to actually seeing your presentation, which I'll have a look at when I can find a spare minute. But thank you for sharing this with the group.
Sure. Give me a call when you look at it if you have any other questions.
Oh, you bet. Thank you.